Let's speak with Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics. Afternoon to you, Jamie.
Afternoon, Ian. I think living in Wales, I should come and join you for your kind of wine drinking, I think,
Yeah,
this afternoon with all these restrictions
indeed.
coming in.
We've timed this all wrong, haven't we? We should have had you
Yeah.
in for exactly that reason. I know you were tweeting a little bit about these restrictions in Wales earlier on today.
Yeah, well, I think to be frank, Ian, it kind of puts the death of the COVID passport, I think, because at the moment, obviously, you can only go into nightclubs if you've had a lateral flow test that's negative or you've got a COVID pass.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've been saying, obviously, for months, I've been quite critical about the policy. This isn't to do with, the vaccine themselves. This is more to do with the vaccine pass policy. I've been quite critical, saying, well, we're seeing a lot of spread across the country and a lot of these events where only people with vaccine passes can go to. And they've been such a success, obviously, that they're now closing nightclubs after Boxing Day. So, and Mark Draper today hasn't ruled out, because he was asked the daily briefing by one of the journalists about the success of the actually vaccine pass himself, and he says that he does think they've been successful because it's meant that some venues have remained
Yeah.
open when they might not have been, and he hasn't really ruled out bringing them into the pubs after Christmas either, Ian. So I
So
just think
this incredibly successful scheme has been so successful, he's closing the very places they've been successful in.
exactly that. And the thing is, we saw the same in France, we've seen the same in Ireland. And you just in the introduction just now, you're talking about which minister across the country would like to reintroduce restrictions. Well, he
Yeah.
was specifically asked today that if he didn't have to rely on the kind of the UK government for the Treasury's money and HMRC doing the systems with tax, he practically said today that we would have a furlough scheme in Wales and people wouldn't be
Yeah.
going back to work. So,
Yeah.
absolutely bonkers. When you look at the facts I'll just quickly give you the facts. In Wales, we haven't had the spread of Omicron yet. So I think he's worrying about the Omicron spread. But if we look at where we currently are, the number of people in hospitals at a 3 month low, they're 75% lower than this time last year. Deaths are 80% lower than this time last year and falling. So all the indicators are positive. I think what the First Minister's doing is he's looking at England, in London, in Scotland,
Yeah.
these big rises, and he's a bit concerned with those.
And you kind of wonder whether, I mean, is there any world leader? I know people always point to Saint Jacinda in New Zealand, although I think there was a bit of a perfect storm and a slight lucking in on her part. Plus, only about 7 people live in New Zealand. There is that. But generally speaking, I mean, it doesn't seem to be something everyone's tried to swerve it. In all those countries, Germany and France, where they had mask wearing, they've had huge outbreaks of and rising cases before the Omicron variant. Jamie, we were seeing cases rise as they were falling over here, where we didn't have those same restrictions.
Yeah, I think Austria, the cases did shoot up a lot there. They did increase testing a lot, which is partly why. And then they introduced these lockdowns, and cases have started coming down because all it does, Ian, is you
Yeah.
introduce a lockdown, stop people mixing. I always think of it in terms of you watching something on Netflix, you press pause, go and get yourself a cup of tea, come back, press play again, and that's kind of what a lockdown does. All it does is it just pauses the spread. As soon as you reopen again, it just people who would have been affected before will get infected a bit later. That's just naturally how these things work. The only real justification for any of these restriction measures is if the NHS is becoming overwhelmed. And like I say, the pressure on the NHS from COVID, in particular in Wales, in England, and ironically, Scotland, we haven't seen any impact yet of the Omicron variant.
Yeah.
The number of patients in hospital has been kind of falling for several weeks in Scotland as
Well,
well. So
indeed.
all
Yeah.
the indicators are pretty positive. It was all about protect the NHS. Now the goalpost is all about, well, Omicron's going to create these big super spread events. The interesting thing today, out of our South Africa, is that they're looking at the cases and the hospitalization ratio. It is at a kind of an all-time low compared to the last variant. So people have been saying,
Wow.
I think there's milder. It's looking like that as well.
That's interesting. I noticed what took me to well, I always look at your Twitter feed, Jamie, but I mean the point you made about, and this is really crucial, I think, going forward for all nations in the UK, Wales removing proof of natural immunity from the COVID pass requirement.
Yeah, and it's actually in England as well, but they didn't technically remove it in England because there was no
Because
requirement
it
to have a
wasn't there,
COVID pass.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when they brought it in on Wednesday, even though Chris Whitty on Tuesday was talking about the reason South Africa might be in a much better place this time than last time is because they've got lots more natural immunity, and there's estimates that about 70 to 80% of South Africans have been infected with COVID, and that might be why there's fewer people going in. So what we've got now, Ian, in this country is that millions of people have been infected. I've had two jabs. I've had COVID recently. I don't necessarily see a need to have a booster immediately.
Yeah.
But say I don't have a booster, next month Sajid Javid might turn around and say, well, if you haven't had a booster, you can't get a COVID pass. Lots of people will be in that situation. And it just seems to be very strange that they're removing the natural immunity in bold writing as well on the government website that natural immunity will not be allowed.
How can that even be a thing? I mean, is it because they? Well, the only I always try and second guess their thinking, Jamie. Is it that natural immunity can, it might be natural immunity today, but tomorrow or a couple of days later, or a week later, that could wane. Whereas if you have the booster, we know you've got 6 months, 8 months solid of better protection. Is it that, or am I being too generous?
I think you're being too generous because my partner, she caught COVID at the same time as me, and she was asked to be she works at the NHS, but she was asked to be part of an antibody test. But should the government pay for it? The Office for National Statistics does an antibody survey, and they estimate how many people have got antibodies in the country, and it's over 90%. So the government themselves accept kind of the thing. And when you get a text message back actually from these tests, it says that we've detected antibodies in your body. This may have come from the vaccine or a prior infection, and that will offer significant protection for you. So even they can't distinguish if it's from a prior infection or the vaccine. So I just think, Ian, it's just absolute bonkers that they're going down this road. I think it's, the government wouldn't be minded to start doing some antibody testing for people who kind of already had kind of the 2 doses of the vaccine or haven't had any doses and think they've got some sort of protection.
But I mean, if you've got proof, I'm having an antibody test next week because I'm out of just basic intrigue, Jamie, to be honest, double jabbed, had COVID, all of that. And I'm intrigued. So it would be in a very rare place that you may well be able to display that you don't require medicine that isn't going to give you any more protection than you currently have, but you will be compelled to have it. I can't think of any other pharmaceutical or drug where you would be told to take it if you don't need it.
No, indeed. And if you look at some of the ONS stats, Ian, what they're saying is that you have got a significant reduction in catching COVID if you've had vaccines. We know that. But if you actually look at the facts and figures, that if you've had COVID previously, if you compare the kind of the reduction in terms of catching COVID versus somebody who's never had COVID, it's exactly the same when you look at the stats as comparing somebody who's unvaccinated and somebody who's had 3 doses. So prior infection offers significant protection. Yeah. And you only got to look today now with, I think Brentford have got a COVID issue. 100% of their football team have been vaccinated. So vaccination doesn't stop the spread. But what the studies are showing that vaccination is really good in terms of kind of making you not go in the hospital. But prior infection is just as good as well.
Yeah. Got it. Listen, Jamie, thank you. Great to talk. Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics. Some really interesting stuff in what he was saying there. We'll talk again to him.